BWM NFL podcast. My name is Riccardo Stewart, and I'm your host. And I'm here with my friends, Zach Miller, Sam Acho, and the professor himself, Jeff Locke. For the past couple of episodes, we've really been focusing on talking to parents and student athletes as it relates to NIL. And not so much how to get the NIL deals, but what do you do when the money comes in? And so a few weeks ago, we started off talking, hey, how do I choose an advisor? Because there's about 300,000 plus advisors. They're not the same. And so how do I choose an advisor? We began to talk about how to build credit, how to choose a bank. Last week, we talked about your biggest destroyer of your wealth, and that's going to be taxes. And today, we're going to look a little bit at investing. But before we do that, we start off all of our meetings with our clients and with usually the phrase of, hey, what's top of mind? Meaning, what's on your mind? What's going on? Before we talk about anything financial, what is top of mind? And so I'm going to ask you guys that question today is, what's top of mind? Sam, you go first.
For top of mind for me right now is the idea of community and relationship. Maybe it's not in the financial space, but I think sometimes it's hard to operate at full capacity when you're not in community. And so how do you solve for that? How do we actually live in community and authenticity and try to be better for our teammates or people we work with and not be alone? I'm seeing a lot of that. And so that's one thing that's top of mind for me. How do you build community?
Nice. Jeff?
Yeah, so I'm actually going back to Minnesota later this week for one of the first times in a while. I got a charity event I'm a part of, and I'm actually going to stop by the new Vikings facility and see some old friends from when I played there. So OTAs and travel are on my mind at the moment.
Nice. Truth, how about you?
So my kids are done with school on Wednesday. Here in Arizona, we start summer early, which is good because it's already hot. And then really just getting our rookies on set up for OTAs for that, off-season program. And their signing bonuses are about to come and really communicating how they're going to put that money to work.
Yeah. Top of mind for me, just same thing as Zach is, school's about to end. I'm here in Arizona with him, and my oldest is having his 8th grade graduation or promotion, whatever they call it. And so he's about to get out of junior high and on his way to high school, which makes me feel a little old. It's the first time I feel like, dang, I'm about to have a high school kid. So, hey, this is something that has just been on my mind. We got to say it on the podcast. Before we start talking about investing with the NIL, I saw some things today, which I'm sure you saw. There's a former player from Arizona State that's transferred to Georgia. He's suing the University of Florida in terms of NIL. I mean, for money that was allegedly offered to him, but he didn't get. And there's just so much happening. And what people aren't hearing about, and sadly they're going to, is when it comes to taxes, is that some of the individuals that are receiving the money are spending it at a rate that when April 15th comes in the following year, they don't have enough for their tax liability. Zach, can you speak to that? I know we've talked about this and we've talked to some players and they've been in this situation.
Yeah, the IRS is going to get their cut every time. The tax man never loses. So the last thing we want is any player to owe the IRS money when they're still in college or starting their rookie season. So take 30% of whatever you're making and just set it aside. Throw it in a savings account to where you're just like, that's my tax money. If I end up paying less than that, that's gravy. But literally just 30%, save that, set it aside, because there's no money going to the government from that NIL income. So you got to do it yourself.
Yeah, that's just really important for the student athletes, coaches, anybody in their lives to be able to just let them know that and say it over and over and over and over again. So let's talk investing. Okay, I'm a student athlete, right? And I got a little bit of money. You guys have told me how to open up a bank. I got a good banking account. You guys have told me how to build their credit. I'm building some credit. And you know what? I actually chose an advisor, and I made sure to choose one that's a fiduciary. Zach, you taught me a new word, so I'm happy. Now I want to get to talking about how do I begin to pay my future self and investing. And so let me start first with you, Acho. When you were in Texas, let's just say that NIL was happening and you were at the University of Texas and you got a little bit of dough. When you hear the word invest, not now, because obviously you're an advisor now, but what would have come to your mind? Like what some of things would have just popped to your mind when you heard that?
Well, a little bit of fear would have popped to my mind, if I'm being totally honest. When I was in college, it was right around that big financial crisis. And so I'm looking at people's accounts and looking at the news. I'm like, okay, well, what's going on? And so I wouldn't have been too apt to invest any or a lot of my money, because I understand what people have been saying about investing and the power and its growth. But I'm also saying, well, this is my money. And what happens if it doesn't go right for me?
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, you were doing that 2007 through 2008 time. That makes sense. Well, we're going to start first with some more questions that start first. Continue with some questions. Zach, when it comes to, or actually Jeff, when it comes to the way in which we come alongside NIL, the guys who become our clients, where do we usually start when it comes to investing?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the accounts we set up, right? Because they can be really confusing. Sometimes there's a lot of accounts, and I think of them in two different buckets. So the first bucket of accounts you need, or ones we call the taxable accounts. All that means is that stuff happens in that account over time, the IRS is going to get their cut over time. So there's a regular investment account and a checking account. Sometimes there's an LLC account, depending on your situation. So you might have three accounts over in this, what we call the taxing bucket that gets taxed. Then there's other special accounts. We call those all retirement accounts. And what essentially happened back in the day, government said, we want you to save for your own retirement, so we don't got to pay for it ourselves. And they created all these special accounts with different tax breaks to try and make you save for your retirement. So these are the ones that we actually see missed a lot, because it's a lot easier just to open up the taxable accounts in that bucket one and dump money in there. It's a lot harder to figure out all the rules and regulations and limits and all the things that go along with opening up the retirement accounts, but you can save tens of thousands of dollars in taxes, and your accounts can grow to hundreds of thousands of dollars more by investing in those retirement accounts instead of just bucket one, those taxable accounts.
Well, that's good. And these guys, you're 20, 21, 22, Zach, I've heard you say this before. There's a superpower when it comes to investing. And what is that superpower and why?
Yeah, investing at a young age. If you want to see silly math, start investing for long periods of time. And just the way compounding works, so having your money work for you over long periods of time, it's where like $1 turns into $10. I mean, and over 30 years, there's something called the rule of 72. I'm not going to go into the math of it, but it's how quickly you can double your money. And so getting a framework of like, okay, I'm starting it when I'm 20, 21 years old. 30 years later, I should have 10. If I'm investing the right way, just using what the market's done in the past, I have 10 times the amount of money. So if I can put $100,000 to work, I'm talking about $1 million 30 years later. And that's how investing works. You start early, you stay disciplined, and good things happen. But the hardest part at that age, at least when I was 21, would have been to save that $100,000.
Well, you know, Zach, Jeff, you were talking about different accounts and retirement accounts, and it's really difficult to talk to a 20-year-old and say, hey, we need to talk about retirement. Most of them have not had like a regular job, and we're talking about retirement. But is there, in terms of the IRAs, is there an amount where I make too much that I could even utilize any of those accounts? Because some of these guys are getting a lot of money.
Yeah, it's one of the most misunderstood things about IRAs, because you Google it, you look online, and it's going to say, hey, at $146,000, you can no longer put money into this Roth IRA, which is one of the most special types of retirement accounts you can use. But in reality, as long as you have earned income in 2024, at least $7,000, you can put money into an IRA as long as you have the income to back up the contribution you're going to make that year.
Perfect. So we also, with all of our clients, and so if you're an NFL client with us, one of the things we like to do is make sure that they have a protective reserve. Some people call it an emergency fund. We've mentioned it on different podcasts. And that is a long runway. Zach always says it best, is like a pilot would rather have a longer runway than a shorter runway. I just got off a plane right now, and I did fly on a low budget flight. And let me tell you, I don't know what that pilot was doing. But we have this protective reserve. And we also do it for our NIL, our student athletes. And when it comes to that, how is that usually invested, or how ought to be invested?
So yeah, with protective reserve, you're just not going to put that money at risk. So when I say like you want good returns, you want safe returns or safer returns with your protective reserve, because you never want to. It never makes sense with those things that are essential in life think like the basics, food, clothing, shelter. Like you would never want to risk that in a market that can go up and down and permanently destroy your wealth. You see that a lot of times. You also don't want to have too much of that because there is an opportunity cost, or you're wasting essentially what you could have if you were properly invested. So it goes both ways. You want to have the right amount, which there is a right amount, which we work very hard with our guys to make sure that there's a right amount of protective reserve. So that runway is long, but not excessively long that costs you wealth in the long term.
Yeah, there's a once football's over, there is a transition, right? And so, Sam, so you have to have a runway to like, what am I going to do next? Sam, how long or how hard was it for you when you were done playing to go, okay, I'm gonna get into, being a broadcaster. I'm like, how did you get it? Not even how did you get into it, but how long did it take for you to transition?
It took a long time. I mean, it was not easy to transition by any means because you spent so much of your time focusing on mastering your craft. And that's all that you are maybe dialed in on. Yes, there are other things you care about you may do in the off season, but man, this is your biggest job. And so when you transition, yes, it's their idea of doing one thing and going to another. But also there's this idea of, man, I have to mourn that loss. I remember when I was towards the end of my career and I could kind of feel it and sense it. I was like, man, something's going on. The desire to like that fire that I had and that drive for football seemed like it was switching in different directions. You talk about it, some of the speaking stuff, the writing, helping other guys, whether it's in some of the stuff we're doing right now, that passion started to transition. And so there was a mourning, and I think there is a mourning process when you go through a transition, any kind of transition. And it's not always this easy, nice climb. It's oftentimes it's up and it's down and it's left and it's right. And so I think that's the biggest thing I experienced is the fact that, yes, my desires were starting to change and my drives and passions and things I wanted to spend more of my time doing were shifting. But there still was this idea of, man, I love this thing. And how am I going to leave this thing? So it was hard.
Yeah. And I mentioned that because most people don't think that relates to finances, but it does. Because if you don't have any money, you're going to have to take the first job available. And that may not be your true calling, passions, desires, and so forth. And so you want to be able to invest in a way, even as a student athlete, to go, hey, if I don't get the opportunity to go play at the next level, I don't want to have to just this is no dig on any of these jobs, but if you're an athlete, someone's going to tell you to get into medical device sales. Enterprise is going to come after you to sell some rental cars. And that may not be what you want to do. You might want to go back to school and finish your master's and go do something else. And so you want to be able to invest towards that and begin to think about the future. I'm about to put you on the spot, Zach, and then I got a bonus questions for you, Jeff. Zach, you are a tight end at Arizona State University. You are who you were there, which is you were a baller, and you got $150,000. Knowing what you know now, put yourself back in your 20-year-old self, Zach. What are you doing about that money and how is it invested?
Well, first, let me just hit on what you just talked about. Was I had the ability to go back and finish my degree at ASU because I left early from school. So it gave me that flexibility because I didn't know what I want to do when I was done playing. I was all in on football. So having that runway to be able to go back to school and then find like another passion was so massive for me. I can't emphasize how important it is for every NFL player to have that flexibility and that optionality. You can't put a price on that. For me as a 21-year-old kid at ASU, I mean, I was always a good saver. So I would have saved some of that money. I would have put it to work. But the biggest thing was if I did it the right way, I would have still been able to buy like some nice things, shoes, have my own car, all the things that I would have wanted in college and didn't really have. I would have bought all those things, but I also would have saved. I would have at least been allocating things, putting money to work in those things we talk about, individual 401k, do the backdoor Roth, do all those things because I would have been thinking long term. I would have been thinking about life after football at every level and made sure that those were earning kind of the way they should be and not just sitting in a bank account, because that's some of the time. Sometimes you see that is a lot of guys just hold a bunch of cash and they're costing themselves wealth in the long term. So that's one thing that you can be too risky, but you can also be too kind of afraid of taking risk with your money. And it makes sense to have someone help you with that.
Exactly. If you could just spell that out.
Rick, you knew 20-year-old Zach. You played with him. Like, does this check out? Like, was he like this back in the day?
I would love to tell you like all these bad stories about Zach, but like he was pretty smart and he was dialed in. You know, things have significantly changed, but no. So I could see him doing all of those things, and I do, because I think about we talk to these athletes and like the things they want to do. Some of them think they have more money than they really. I'm going to buy my mama a house. I'm going to buy a car. I might run for president. It's like, you don't have that much money, and then some guys have no idea the opportunity that they have. Sam, before we shut it down, I knew you were going to ask something.
Yeah, well, I wanted to Zach to spell that out even more. You say guys are costing, because that was me. When I was in college, when I first got drafted, I kept my money at a bank account because I wasn't sure about all this investing stuff. You look at Giannis, right? Giannis, like, okay, I know that there's this FDIC insurance at different banks. We keep my money at different banks and different kinds of accounts, maybe get this money protected. That was me in college. But you just said, okay, well, some guys are costing themselves money. And I know we've been kind of talking around it. Let's talk exactly to it. How exactly are guys costing themselves money by keeping it at a bank rather than investing it? Because some people may think bank investor.
We kind of hit on this a little bit in the previous episode, but if you let the bank have your money and pay you almost no interest, you're helping the bank earn all the profits when you should be the one getting those profits. So think like the bank is out. You should be earning good returns on your money. And then when you get to put money into those retirement accounts, you get to invest for the long term. So you're really looking for really good growth there versus just what's in your protective reserve. So there's a right amount to do that. And anytime that you're kind of mismanaging that, you are costing yourself money because the bank's earning it.
Good. So let me just kind of wrap all these things up. One, you got to pick a good advisor, primarily one who has a fiduciary responsibility. Number two is you got to get a good bank. Okay. You can listen to the second episode in this series and learn more about that. Build your credit effectively. You're going to have to pay taxes, and there's strategies that you can use. Okay. But rule of thumb, as Zach said, take whatever you get in from your NIL, 30%, set it aside because you're going to have to pay the tax man. And let me tell you, he is undefeated. And lastly, you should invest. And if you should have an advisor. If you've already done that, then you should talk about an individual 401k, an IRA, as it fits you. You should talk about ways to help in terms of your tax strategies. And so if you have any questions, if you're a parent, if you're a coach, if you're a DFO at a university, please reach out to us. The number is 602-989-5022. Again, that's 602-989-5022.
The information in this podcast is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration the listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision.